She filled in as a hotel receptionist for a day, unaware she'd check in a millionaire who'd change her life. Under the flickering light of the front desk lamp, Emily's fingers danced across the keyboard, trying to make sense of the outdated reservation system. It was her first time working a hotel shift, and she was only there because her best friend Jenna had called 2 hours earlier, her voice raspy with fever, practically begging her to fill in. The hotel was small, tucked between shuttered shops and quiet alleys, but tonight's rain made everything feel more isolated. The door chimed. Emily looked up, startled. A tall man stepped in from the downpour, rain dripping from his black coat, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if the weight of the weather mirrored something inside him. His dark hair clung to his forehead, and his eyes, those eyes, were lifeless, hollow, as if they hadn't seen light for far too long. She cleared her throat and put on her best smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" He hesitated, standing a little too long in silence. I'm not sure," he said, his voice low, almost raspy. "I called earlier." She nodded and began typing. "No problem. What name should I check under?" Again, that pause. He looked at her, not just at her face, but through her, like someone trying to decide whether to speak or disappear. "Graham," he said finally. "Graham Weston." Emily entered the name and quickly found the booking. "Got it. Room 204. One night. King bed. Late checkout." He didn't respond. "Would you like help with anything else?" she asked, handing him the key card. Graham took the card slowly. Their fingers brushed for a split second, but he didn't flinch. Nor did he smile. "Thank you," he murmured, then turned. Halfway to the elevator, he stopped. Emily watched as he stood still, his back to her, unmoving for nearly 5 seconds. Then he turned his head slightly, just enough that she saw the side of his face again. His eyes, distant and empty, met hers for a second. Then he stepped inside the elevator and was gone. She exhaled. Something about him unsettled her, not in fear, but in sorrow, like watching someone drowning while still standing on dry land. An hour passed. The lobby remained quiet. Emily settled back into her chair behind the desk, idly scrolling through old magazines. Rain tapped gently on the windows, a steady rhythm that matched the ticking of the wall clock above her. Then something caught her eye. Outside, past the glass doors, barely visible through the sheets of rain, was a figure. She stood up slowly. No umbrella, no movement. Just a man sitting on the metal bench in the small balcony garden outside room 204. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't on his phone. He was just sitting motionless, drenched, like he didn't feel the cold at all. Emily pressed closer to the glass. It was Graham. She glanced at the clock. It had been over an hour since he checked in. Still, he sat there, head bowed, shoulders sagging. She wanted to step out to ask if he was okay, but something held her back. Not fear, intuition, an unshakable feeling that this wasn't just a man caught in the rain. This was someone trying to feel something. Anything. A flash of lightning lit up the sky behind him. For a moment, his silhouette was sharp against the wet stone walls, his hands clenched together like in prayer or despair. Emily's chest tightened. She turned away from the window, her heart pounding, unsure why her throat felt tight. Back at the desk, she stared at the blank notepad beside the phone, and slowly, almost without thinking, she tore a piece from it. She picked up a pen. Her hand hovered for a moment. Then she wrote a single sentence. She folded the note carefully. No one came into the lobby after that. The rain fell harder, and Emily sat quietly, the folded piece of paper resting in her palm, waiting for the right moment. Emily did not sleep that night, even after her shift ended, even after the manager returned and thanked her with a tired smile. Even after she walked the 12 blocks home with sore feet and damp clothes, her mind remained stuck on the man in room 204, Graham Weston. She repeated the name silently again and again, as though it might unlock something. The way he'd stood on the balcony for over an hour in the cold rain without flinching. It haunted her. It wasn't just sadness in his eyes. It was vacancy. A kind of stillness that whispered not peace, but surrender, as if his body remained only because no one had told it to stop breathing yet. By clock eye, she was still awake, wrapped in a worn blanket, sitting on the edge of her narrow bed. Her tiny apartment buzzed faintly with the sounds of distant traffic and a neighbor's television. Her knees were pulled up to her chest, her thoughts looping endlessly. She had seen that look before on herself in mirrors, in moments when the world felt too heavy to carry. She reached for the battered spiral notebook she kept beside her bed. It usually held grocery lists, work schedules, reminders to call her landlord or email professors. She flipped to a blank page, then paused. What could she say to a man she didn't know? What could she possibly write that wouldn't sound naive? She didn't overthink it. She let her hand move, her heart speaking faster than her mind. If you are still alive today, you are braver than you think. No name, no explanation. Just that. It wasn't advice. It wasn't pity. It was truth. One she needed to hear herself sometimes. Before dawn, she returned to the hotel. She told the night receptionist that she'd left her phone charger in the break room. No one questioned her. Room 204 was still occupied. A faint strip of warm light glowed from beneath the door. Emily crouched, folded the paper in half, and gently slid it under with a shaky finger. Her heart thumped in her throat. She stood for a moment staring at the number on the door, then walked away. The next morning, she returned to her normal life. Graham was gone, checked out before sunrise. No message, no note, no trace. His room was cleared, his name crossed off the log. When Emily asked Jenna at the front desk if he'd said anything, Jenna only shrugged. Nothing. Handed me the key and walked out. Didn't even ask for a receipt. A strange feeling bloomed in Emily's chest. Not sadness, not exactly, just hollowness, like waiting for a reply that never came. She told herself she was being foolish. He was a stranger, a man she'd seen once. It was silly to expect a sign, a thank you, a smile. But still, she had hoped for something. Instead, all she got was silence. Days passed. She went back to the chaos of her life. Bookstore shifts in the morning, cafe work in the evenings, library hours squeezed between. Her bank balance dropped. Her tuition bill loomed. Her college advisor warned that without payment, her enrollment might be suspended. The pressure pressed down harder. She tried to forget room 204. But sometimes, when she was closing the cafe alone, wiping down the counters to the hum of a floor fan, she would remember the rain-soaked man on the balcony, the one with eyes like doorways to nowhere. And she wondered, not constantly, but in quiet flashes. Did that note matter? Did he read it? Was he okay? She would never know. But deep down she hoped, desperately, silently, that those 12 words had held him just long enough, that maybe, just maybe, they had caught someone on the brink. 2 months had passed since that rainy night. Emily had folded the memory of Graham into a quiet corner of her mind, filed somewhere between fleeting curiosity and silent hope. Life had not slowed down. If anything, it had grown heavier. Tuition fees mounted. Her cafe shifts grew longer, and the bookstore had cut back her hours due to low sales. So when she opened her email one morning and saw a message titled, "Employment Opportunity, Assistant to Executive Director She assumed it was spam until she read the details. Her full name was spelled correctly. The message mentioned a personal recommendation. The sender was a major corporation in the health tech sector, Ethereon, a company she had only vaguely heard of from the news. She reread the email 3 times. She had never applied for this job. A contact number was listed. She dialed it with shaking fingers, half expecting a machine to answer. "Good morning, this is Catherine from Ethereum. Is this Miss Emily Clark?" A cheerful voice said. "Yes," she stammered. "We're delighted you received our message. We'd like to invite you for an in-person meeting with our executive director regarding the assistant position." "I think there's been a mistake," Emily said. "I never applied." There was a pause. "Actually, you were referred by someone who asked to remain anonymous for now." Emily agreed to the meeting, unable to explain why, her heart thrumming with unease and something dangerously close to excitement. 3 days later, she found herself standing in front of Ethereum's gleaming headquarters, wearing her best second-hand blazer and the only heels she owned. The lobby was polished marble and glass. Every step she took echoed. She was escorted to the executive floor. "Wait here," the assistant said, gesturing to a door. Emily stepped inside. The office was flooded with light from ceiling-high windows, modern, minimal. And at the far end, behind a sleek desk of black walnut, stood a man in a tailored suit. His back was turned as he looked out over the skyline. He turned, and Emily stopped breathing. It was him, Graham, but not the man from room 204. This version stood tall, his shoulders squared, clean-shaven, his hair neatly styled. His eyes still held depth, but now they were awake. He smiled gently. "Hello, Emily," he said. She blinked, stunned. "You? You work here?" "I run it," he replied. "Ethereum was my company from the start. I've just returned." She could barely find words. "I don't understand." Graham stepped forward, pulling something from his jacket pocket, a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges, water-stained, but still legible, her handwriting. "If you are still alive today, you are braver than you think." "I kept it," he said softly. "I read it 3 times that morning. And then I got up, packed my bag, and checked out, not because I felt better, but because I realized someone out there believed I might be worth saving." Emily stared at the note in his hand, her chest tightening. "I had planned," he continued, "to end everything that night. I will not lie to you. I was not in pain. I was numb. I believed nothing mattered. But that line you wrote—" He looked at her now, his voice trembling just slightly. "It interrupted that silence in my mind. It was the first voice that didn't sound like judgment or shame. It was hope." Emily swallowed hard, emotions rising. I didn't know. I was scared. You looked like someone who needed to hear something real." "You were right," Graham said, "and I needed more than anything to hear that I wasn't invisible." Silence fell between them, thick and sacred. Then he said, "I asked the hotel staff for your name. I didn't want to intrude, so I waited until I had something real to offer." He motioned toward the desk. "This position is yours if you want it. Not as charity, not as repayment, but because I believe you belong in a place where your voice matters." Emily looked at him, really looked. He was still the man from that rainy night, but so much more. And somehow, so was she. Working beside Graham became the most unexpected routine of Emily's life. Each morning, she entered the towering Ethereum building with a quiet resolve and left each evening feeling like she had stepped into someone else's story. But it wasn't fantasy. It was real, and it was happening to her. Graham, now back in his full role as CEO, was nothing like the cold executives she had imagined from the outside. He was respectful, composed, but there was a warmth beneath his calm. A warmth that showed itself in small gestures. He brought her hot tea at exactly 3 p.m. every afternoon. Chamomile, because he'd remembered her mentioning she didn't like caffeine. When it rained, he was already at the entrance with an umbrella, holding it above her head with that same quiet expression, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And every time she achieved something small, a well-organized file, a last-minute meeting arranged, he would smile and say, "Thank you. Brave one." At first, she thought it was just a callback to the note, but after weeks of hearing it, the way he said it started to sound different, like a truth he genuinely believed about her. And every time she heard it, she stood a little taller. They developed a rhythm. He invited her once to a street food cart after work, a tiny vendor tucked between two buildings known for the best grilled corn in the city. She laughed when he didn't know how to eat it without getting chili powder on his shirt. He laughed, too, full and real. On other evenings, they stayed behind in the company's small employee library, helping the volunteer staff reshelf books after hours. Graham never announced his presence there. He just rolled up his sleeves and sorted biographies by spine color instead of author name, grinning like a child when corrected. One night, as they walked out, they passed an older security guard struggling with his shoe. The sole had come loose, flapping awkwardly. Graham stopped without a word, knelt down, and used a spare roll of strong tape from his briefcase to bind the man's shoe tightly. "That'll hold for a few days," he said kindly and patted the man's shoulder. Emily watched, her heart clenched. It wasn't about status or performance, it was just who he was. Someone who noticed the unnoticed. Someone who remembered what it was like to feel invisible. And maybe, she thought, that's why he saw her. They began to talk more, not just about work, but about memories, childhood fears, what they wanted to be before life forced them into survival mode. But there was always a line. Neither crossed. It sat there, quiet but heavy, between their chairs and meetings, in the pauses between jokes, in the small silences after laughter. Neither of them acknowledged it, but both of them felt it. One evening, as they waited outside in the company's side garden, just a narrow green strip between buildings with two worn benches and a single cherry tree, Emily broke the silence. Her voice was soft. "I used to sell bottled water in movie theaters." Graham turned, his brows slightly raised. "I wore a uniform 3 sizes too big. My shoes always squeaked when I walked. I dropped a whole tray once and cried in the break room for an hour." He said nothing, waiting. She looked away, fiddling with the sleeve of her cardigan. "I never finished college," she continued. "Couldn't afford it. Most days I still don't know half the jargon people use here. I Google things when I get home. I rehearse answers before meetings." Graham's voice was low. "You are doing more than fine." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I don't belong in a place like this. Not really." Then, almost like a whisper, she added, "I'm just a girl who once sold water at the movies. I don't belong in your world." Graham turned fully toward her. His expression wasn't pity. It was something deeper, something careful. He opened his mouth to respond, but paused. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the same note she had written, the one he still carried, folded with care. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. And in that moment, Emily wasn't sure if she felt comforted or more afraid of how deeply this man could see her. It was late, well past office hours, and the building had fallen into a gentle hush. Outside the window, the city glowed softly, muted under the falling dusk. Emily and Graham sat across from each other in the small break room, half-empty mugs of tea between them. Graham looked tired, but not the kind of tired that came from long meetings or endless emails. This was a weariness born deep in the bones, the kind that settled in the soul. "I owe you a story," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the swirling tea in his cup. Emily tilted her head, listening. "You know I'm the CEO," he said, "but you don't know why I wasn't here until recently." She nodded slowly. She had always wondered about the gap, the whispers around the office, the half-finished sentences in articles she had found online. He leaned back in his chair, the lamplight catching the sharp planes of his face. 6 months ago, a device my company developed, an advanced implant for post-surgical monitoring, malfunctioned during a routine operation. Patient died on the table. Emily's breath hitched. "The failure wasn't caused by our core technology," he said. "It was a defect in a third-party component, something we should have caught but didn't in time." He paused. The media didn't care about nuance. Headlines screamed, "Tech CEO plays God with human lives." Ethereum's gamble turns fatal. I became the face of greed, of arrogance, of reckless ambition. He swallowed. Investors fled. Our stock collapsed overnight. I stepped down to protect what little integrity the company still had. Emily sat in stunned silence. "But that wasn't the worst part," he said, his voice dropping, almost a whisper. "The brother of the man who died found me, waited outside the courthouse. He didn't scream. He just looked me in the eye and said, 'I hope you live long enough to feel the guilt I do every day.'" A long, still silence passed between them. "That night," Graham continued, "was the first time I didn't sleep at all. The guilt, it ate through me like acid. Not because I pulled the trigger, because I built the gun, and people trusted me with it." He looked down at his hands. "I started drifting, walking through days like they weren't real. I stopped taking calls. I couldn't touch a prototype without shaking. I told myself I was a disease in the shape of a man. Everything I created hurt someone." Emily's eyes burned. "And then," he said, smiling faintly, "I checked into a small hotel. No luggage, no return ticket. I didn't plan to check out." She knew. Her heart thudded. "But under the door," he said, pulling out the now crumpled note from his wallet. "This was waiting for me." He handed it to her. She took it with shaking fingers. "If you are still alive today, you are braver than you think." I read it. I read it 10 times. I cried for the first time in weeks. And then I ordered breakfast. Graham leaned back again, his voice steadier now. "That day I decided to stop hiding. I hired independent investigators, forced open sealed reports, reran every test. It took 3 months, but the truth came out. It wasn't our tech. It wasn't my team. It was a flaw in one supplier's code, buried under 10 layers of subcontracting." Emily was silent. "I didn't sue. I didn't announce anything. I took the report to the victim's family myself. I sat with them every week for 2 months until their son's name didn't taste like acid when I said it. And the company, it's recovering," he said. "Slowly, we've rebuilt most of the trust. But I came back different. I came back knowing power isn't about vision. It's about responsibility." He looked at her now, his voice lower. "And that's when I found you again." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she placed the note down on the table. Her throat tightened, and her chest ached in a way she couldn't explain. She had walked into this job thinking she was just a helper, a lucky girl, an afterthought. But sitting across from this man, she realized something powerful. He wasn't a hero. He was a survivor. And so was she. The weeks that followed were the gentlest Emily had ever known. She and Graham worked closely on a new project, a health outreach initiative for underserved communities. It was his idea, but he always introduced it as theirs. Together they mapped out mobile clinic routes, partnered with non-profit organizations, and visited local centers. Every meeting, every discussion felt like building something that mattered, and always Graham was attentive in quiet, almost invisible ways. He would place a cup of warm water on her desk just as she sat down without needing to ask her preference. If he noticed she was buried in emails, he would leave a small note. Breathe. If her hands were cold in the conference room, he would slide over his mug for her to hold. Somehow he had learned that she liked flashcards for new words. So one day, tucked between a stack of meeting folders, she found a fresh pack labeled, "Today's English, from your quiet supporter." Emily began to feel safe, but with that safety came a knowing fear. She couldn't name it at first. It crept in between compliments and thoughtful gestures, blooming quietly in moments when no one else was watching. It whispered to her when she passed the mirror in the executive elevator or when she walked through corridors lined with glass walls and confident stares. The questions circled her heart like a shadow. Do I really belong here? Or am I just passing through someone else's world? At one of the company's formal networking dinners, Emily wore a simple navy dress, borrowed from a neighbor, and tucked her hair back with trembling fingers. She had tried to walk like she belonged, speak like she belonged. But then came the whisper. Near the dessert table, two colleagues, well-dressed, confident, the kind who'd never once said hello, stood chatting. One of them glanced toward her and smirked. "Nice of the CEO to bring his assistant," he said. "Though I guess when someone saves your life, it buys them a seat at the table." The other chuckled. "Or maybe she's just very persuasive." Emily froze. She didn't confront them. She didn't even turn around. She just walked out of the room. The laughter followed her like a ghost. The night air was sharp, the stars too quiet. Inside her chest, something twisted. Back at her table, Graham was still speaking with a guest speaker. He hadn't noticed she'd left. Or maybe he had, but gave her space. It didn't matter. She returned briefly, just long enough to slide a folded note onto his plate. Then she left. The note read, "You saved me from despair, but now I need to save myself from forgetting who I am." She didn't go home right away. She walked for hours through neighborhoods that reminded her of where she came from, past clothed markets and dim lights, places where no one knew her name, but every corner held a version of the girl she used to be. Emily wasn't angry. She was afraid that she was starting to measure her worth by the gentleness of someone else's world. Afraid that every kind thing Graham did, though it was real and beautiful, might also be stitching her into a life she hadn't earned yet. She needed to step back, not to escape him, but to find herself independent of the man who once made her feel seen. Because if love was to grow, and she was honest enough now to name it love, it had to bloom between two whole people, not one reaching up and the other pulling down. She owed that to herself, and to him. Emily handed in her letter the following Monday. It wasn't a resignation, but a quiet step back, a request for an indefinite leave of absence, typed neatly, sealed in a simple envelope, and left on Graham's desk before the office filled with voices, and the day became loud. She didn't wait to see his reaction. She didn't linger for approval. The letter said everything she needed it to. "Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for helping me begin. But now I have to walk this next part of the road on my own." She left her badge beside the envelope, its lanyard coiled neatly like a ribbon on a gift. Then she walked out through the glass doors without a goodbye. But she knew somehow he would understand. That evening, she sat at her small kitchen table and enrolled in a night class program at the local college, business communications, digital literacy, and a workshop in nonprofit management. Her schedule became a map of sacrifice, tutoring children from 8 a.m. to noon, doing freelance data entry from home until mid-afternoon, then rushing across town to attend classes until 10 p.m. Her new apartment was modest. One room, no elevator, no balcony, but the rent was hers to pay, the furniture hers to choose, and the silence at the end each day hers to keep. There were no gifts from Graham, no favors pulled, no hidden strings. He had offered to help quietly, respectfully, a scholarship here, a contact there. She declined, not out of pride, but purpose, because she didn't want to be built by someone else's kindness. She wanted to be whole, to come back to him, not as a girl rescued, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself. He never pressed, and still his presence lingered. They messaged, not every day, but often enough, not with declarations of longing, but with small truths. "Had to do a 5-minute pitch today. I didn't faint. Tried that ramen place you mentioned. Verdict, 7/10. Needs more garlic. Found a word that means healing in progress. Will send later." It was strange being apart, yet held. It wasn't romance, not in the traditional sense, but it was something more durable. And somewhere between exhaustion and growth, Emily realized she wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. Each rent check paid. Each child she helped read a paragraph without stumbling. Each night, she fell asleep on her own terms. It was all a thread, weaving a life that finally felt like her own design. And still, some nights, when the city grew quiet and her textbooks were closed, she would open her journal and write. One entry, penned under the hum of midnight rain, remained her favorite. "He waited at the edge of my storm, not to pull me out, just to hold the umbrella if I ever turned back. If he's still there when I find my center, then we can begin again. Not from chapter 1, but from chapter 2, as two whole people who choose each other." 2 years passed. Emily stood before a packed auditorium, the lights warm on her face, the microphone gentle in her hand. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a simple twist, and she wore a navy dress that had once belonged to her mother. She didn't need a teleprompter. Her voice, once shy and uncertain, now carried clarity and quiet confidence. She had grown into her story, not just the one others told about her, but the one she had learned to tell herself. She was being honored for her work with a non-profit organization that provided literacy programs and healthcare access for underprivileged women. The project had started with one borrowed classroom, 2 students, and a stack of donated books. Now it was a statewide network. Hundreds of women, mothers, survivors, daughters, could now write their names, understand prescriptions, ask questions without fear. As the standing ovation echoed through the hall, Emily looked out over the crowd. She saw familiar faces, students who had become volunteers, doctors who had once doubted her, now nodding with pride. And still, she felt her heart skip, not from nerves, but from something else, a sense that the moment wasn't quite complete. When the applause finally faded and the formalities ended, she stepped off the stage and into the crowd, shaking hands, hugging old friends, laughing with the women whose lives now intertwined with hers. And then she saw him standing in the back row, away from the spotlights and cameras, dressed in quiet gray, His figure tall and composed, his hair a little longer now, a touch of silver at the temples. Graham. He hadn't reserved a seat at the front. He hadn't sent flowers or a message. He had simply come. Their eyes met across the room, and everything else, the noise, the lights, the movement, seemed to fade. Later that evening, they found themselves walking together along the riverside, the same river where 2 years ago Emily had walked alone on a stormy night, lost in questions. The air now was cool, tinged with the scent of coming rain. The path was quiet, the city muffled in the background. The lamplight flickered on the water like a memory returning home. "I never expected to see you today," Emily said softly. "I never stopped following your work," Graham replied, his voice calm. She turned slightly toward him, the corner of her mouth lifting. "You never said a word." "I didn't need to," he said. "You were already saying everything through what you did." They paused by a bench that overlooked the water. Emily traced the wood with her fingers, then looked at him. "Do you still have it?" she asked. Graham pulled out his wallet, careful and unhurried. He unfolded the worn, water-stained piece of paper, the same one she had slipped under his hotel room door so long ago. "If you are still alive today, you are braver than you think." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "You kept it all this time," he said, "because it gave mine back to me.